Hello, I'm Katie Woods. I'm a director in our global sustainability reporting team, focused on all that's going on in the sustainability reporting arena. I'm back with my weekly update. This week, looking at the outcome of the latest ISSB, International Sustainability Standards board meeting, and this time it was with the IASB, the International Accounting Standards Board. I'll then move on to perhaps a more tricky area, which is looking at the requirements in the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards, covering areas of, first of all, estimation, and then looking at prior year errors. But let's start with the board meeting. As I mentioned, it was a joint meeting with the ISSB and IASB, and they were looking at one of the specific areas where request for comment was asked in the agenda priority exposure draft that came out in the summer of 2023. The area was that of integration in reporting and connectivity. There were really positive outcomes of this discussion and certainly clear desire between the two boards to work closely together. I think probably the most significant point that came out of that discussion is the acknowledgement that embedded within the standards, the ISSB standards, is the requirement to work with that is in the financial reporting standards. And so we'll now wait and see what actually the priorities are from the ISSB in relation to the different areas that they've discussed as a consequence of their agenda priority exposure draft. So that was the board meeting. What about the technical area? As I mentioned, first of all, look at estimation. I'm not going to go into the detail of estimation techniques or anything like that, but just the fact that through sustainability reporting, there are going to be estimates throughout that are going to need to be made. Policies, as I mentioned in a previous weekly update, are really the backbone to the reporting, the way in which the entity is reporting what's going on from a sustainability perspective. Now, those policies will need to have measurements, etc., to explain actually how far or what is happening. But those measurements can't always be 100% accurate. The information may not be available, or it's just not possible to gain that information even in the entity or outside the entity. And at that point, there's a need for estimation, no different really from a financial reporting perspective. So estimates will have or will look to address any elements of uncertainty with respect to those metrics that are measured. But within that uncertainty, there's always going to be a question over how strong that metric is. But the standards are quite clear that reasonable estimates are an essential part of sustainability reporting and actually doesn't reduce the usefulness of that sustainability report. So I think that's really key to acknowledge that those estimates should be used throughout. But when you're making estimates, there are always going to be issues with respect to those estimates perhaps not being as accurate as direct measurement. The ISSB standards state that if an estimate has been found to be materially incorrect, then there's a need to change the prior year number, because you're a year later, reflecting that change in estimate. And there's only the situation you wouldn't do that if you've got future looking information and you wouldn't bring into consideration any benefits of hindsight, etc. Now, that might be quite counterintuitive to those people who've been brought up in the financial reporting world, because in general, you wouldn't change your prior year numbers unless there was a prior year error. So let's move on to prior year errors. The ISSB standards, IFRS SDS1, does take this into consideration. Now, what is a prior year error? Prior year error is a situation where information is omitted or misstated. And that would be, because we're talking about errors, misuse or failure to use either information that's available or information that is reasonably expected to be obtained by the entity. So again, available even if it's not been looked for. So once the error has been identified, then management will need to assess its impact. And that's not just on the current year sustainability report, but also on previously issued reports. There's then a requirement to restate that comparative information if there is an error. Unless, using judgment, obviously, it is impractical to do so. But if it is impractical to do so, a disclosure about that fact is needed. So if it is material and there is a requirement to change the comparative, there is also a need to state the nature and connection of that prior year error. So that introduces estimation and prior year errors. And in my next weekly update, I'll then take you through how you distinguish between a change in estimate or indeed a prior year error. So look forward to catching up with you in the next weekly update. Thanks so much for watching.